If there was a modern-day G.K. Chesterton, known for his quick wit, good humor, and startling insights into religion, the Catholic Church, and society as a whole, it could very well be E. Michael Jones. EMJ has been a longtime critic of the devolution of American culture in the 20th century away from more traditional Christian norms. And in Libido Dominandi, he was arguably the first to clearly articulate how sexual liberation is a form of political control. Author of many other works, including Slaughter of Cities, Dr. Jones demonstrates how American social engineers willfully destroyed ethnic urban neighborhoods with blockbusting campaigns and created a new political class of urban voters and a mass of alienated suburban commuters and consumers. Interviewed in countless news outlets, including many in Europe and the Middle East, Dr. Jones does us great honor today in being our guest to discuss the decline of the American system and the many parallels it has with the tumult experienced in the 1960s, as well as that which faced Weimar Germany in the 1920s and 30s.
Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got.
The military-industrial complex.
A new world order.
But we are here to destroy the control over the industry of other people.
I did not trade arms for hostages.
Ich bin ein Theoretiker.
На полный разгром немецких захватчиков.
Myth20c podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Myth of the 20th Century. Today we are joined by an extremely special guest, E. Michael Jones. Dr. Jones is a scholar in the Catholic tradition. He has a series called Culture Wars and many books that we will hopefully be referencing while we're discussing many issues affecting all of us today. But just to introduce my co-hosts, I'm joined today by Nick.
Hello.
Hans.
Hey, guys.
And Alex.
Hi, everyone.
And welcome, Dr. Jones. We're extremely honored to have you on.
Thank you.
So just to warm us all up, you have a very interesting word that you like to use a lot. And so just to get us started, could you explain to us what logos means?
Yes, logos is the Greek word. The primary meaning is word or speech. When I was studying Greek as an undergraduate, I turned to the Liddell Scott Dictionary and was amazed to see the page after page of English translations of the word logos. It is an absolutely crucial word because the idea behind this word is the idea behind Greek philosophy, and this has been lost to us, the modern world. What we call philosophy today is basically anti-philosophy, and by that I mean the writings of people like Nietzsche and Michel Foucault, who the one thing they share in common is hatred of reason, hatred of logos. So if you take all the words that end in ology, like no, I didn't mean cosmetology, biology, anthropology, what they all have in common is there's a kind of order to the discipline, and the order is what we call logos. So it's rationality, it means speech, it means language, it means logic, it means discourse, but also from the theological end, it means the order in the universe that God put there as part of creation.
Yeah, in the beginning there was the word. Is that the
That's
origin?
A fascinating sentence, and it was completely incomprehensible because of the translation. So I use the Greek is en arche en ho logos. In the beginning, there was logos. In other words, there was an order to the universe from the very beginning. This is a complete break with Hesiod, for example, who was the first Greek. He was a contemporary of Homer, and he was the first Greek to try and come up with some type of systematic explanation of everything. And he said in his Theogony, in the beginning, there was chaos. Chaos is the opposite of logos. This was an attempt to be philosophical, and it failed immediately, because if there were nothing but chaos in the beginning, there could never be order. because centuries later, Parmenides came up with the formula. He said, that which is cannot come from that which is not. And so the book I'm working on right now is The History of Logos and the Logos of History. And I just finished the chapter on that 500-year period in human history, beginning with Homer and ending with Aristotle, when the concept of logos first emerged. The word emerged and the concept emerged along with it. And that is the beginning of philosophy as we know it.
Dr. Jones, would it be fair, this is how I conceptualize logos in some way, one level of it. Would it be fair to say that it is like the bounds around which a human being or an animal or anything can act and be sort of in accordance with, be on a path that's sustainable, I guess? Yes,
that's a good way of putting it. The difference between man and animal is that the logos of the animal is programmed into him, and he has no choice in the matter. So animals act according to instinct. So a salmon does not choose to have sex. Electrochemical reactions go off, and the salmon is like a robot that has to turn around and start swimming upstream, lays the eggs, and dies. Human beings are, as Aristotle will say, the human being is the only creature that has logos in the sense that it can act according to those principles. And the first way we act is to achieve the good. And so logos would be an explanation of how you can achieve the good of your nature. We would call that, because you're trying to achieve the good, we call that practical reason, or we call it morality. And that would be the framework that will allow you to make happy choices, choices with happy outcomes, and have a life with a happy outcome as well.
Sure. So maybe there's like a hierarchy. So if we're, Latin Mass Catholics, perhaps, we're taking that seriously, we're in accordance with Logos, at least, we're sinning and all of these things, but we're closer perhaps than a Shia Muslim in Iran, but they're closer than maybe a college student in New England.
Right. I think you have a hierarchy here, and you have to treat people differently depending on where they come from. So it would be a mistake to say that, as I've said before, that Muslims worship a different God. The Muslims are monotheist. We are monotheist. We worship the same God. What differs is our understanding of God. We as Christians have a superior understanding of the nature of God. But you're dealing with people all across the world who have all sorts of different relationships to the Logos because of their histories. And what I'm trying to do with this book is to come up with something that could start a conversation anywhere in the world. And I'm basing this on my experience. I've been a lot of places, and one of the places I was in India. And when I was in India, I gave a talk at a Catholic school, high school, and the 80% of the students are Hindus, and one of the Hindu boys stood up at the question period, and he said, "Can you prove the existence of God?" And I said, "Yes." And afterwards, I thought, why is this Hindu? Everybody in Hindu worships some kind of God. They're not monotheists, okay? They worship snakes, they worship monkeys, they worship everything, and that's the problem, because a snake cannot be God, okay? This is the whole trajectory that took place in Greece that I just talked about. In the beginning, Homer would write about, there were guys, big guys up in heaven with beards, and they were just like human beings. They called them gods, but they could not be gods because of the way they acted. A god would not take on the form of a bull and rape a woman. And this became a huge issue of bone of contention in Greece, because by the time Socrates arrived, Logos had veto power over the gods. Socrates said, we can't teach poetry anymore because Homer's gods are immoral, and God cannot be immoral. It's blasphemy. So what you had was the emergence of a true understanding of God as something spiritual rather than an exalted human being or a monkey or a snake. So what the kid is asking about is God rational? And I'm saying, yes, not only is God, the existence of God, the epitome of rationality, I'm taking it a step further, and I'm saying atheism is the epitome of irrationality. Okay, belief in the existence of God is not an article of faith. It's an article of reason. And that was what the struggle, you had two parallel trajectories going on at the same time. In Greece, you had people who had philosophy and of truncated understanding of history. And in Israel, the Hebrews had a clear understanding of history and creation, but basically no idea of what philosophy was. And these two streams came together in Christianity when St. John said, in the beginning there was Logos. In the beginning are the first three words of Genesis. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth, which is a purely metaphysical statement. That's now joined with the concept of Logos, which is Greek philosophy, and now you have being, an understanding of being in its most sophisticated form.
Well, I believe in one of your interviews you talked about your trip to India, where someone may have asked you about the turtle story going down.
Right.
And I think you explained it with your concept of logos. Do you remember that story you gave?
I do. So, as I said, people from all over the world now will contact me by internet and YouTube. So, an Indian writes to me, and he was raised in England, and he wanted to know what I meant by logos, and I said there's no logos in India. It was an exaggeration. I shouldn't have said it. Any place where there's speech, there is logos. But I said, for some reason, logos stopped developing in India, whereas it did not stop developing in Greece. Oh, it did stop developing in Greece, but at a much higher level. And he said, well, what do you mean? And I said, look at the Indian cosmology. The Indian cosmology is basically the earth is a semicircle. It's resting on the back of four elephants, and the four elephants are standing on a turtle. And then I said to the Indian guy, what's the turtle standing on? Well, he couldn't give me an answer. The answer on the internet is it's turtles all the way down.
Turtles all the way down.
So it's turtles all the way down, and there'll be a discussion of that on the internet. But basically, this is what Aristotle would call an infinite regress. Aristotle in his metaphysics said an infinite regress is impossible. You have to stop at some point or other with the unmoved mover. Okay, and so the analogy I've given before is, the caboose is moving. Why is the caboose moving? Well, because it's attached to a boxcar. Well, why is the boxcar moving? Well, because another boxcar. Well, suppose you had an infinite train of boxcars. You still couldn't explain motion, because what you need at the end of that chain is a locomotive. Aristotle did it the exact opposite way, which would be, okay, you want to build a bridge, you have to pump the water out of the river and get down to the bottom, the bed of the river. At that point, you have to pump the mud out, and then you have to get something to bedrock. You have to get something that will not move. Okay, this is the opposite of the locomotive. Something that will not move. If you don't find something that will not move, you can have an infinite number of bricks or whatever, an infinite number of cement, and you still can't build a bridge. And this is the refutation of that infinite regress, which is basically the Indians' turtles all the way down. Can't work. At the end of that chain, there has to be some unmoved mover. And this is what Aquinas, when he ends his proofs of the existence of God, this is what all men call God. You can't have creation, you can't have existence without God. And the reason I mention this is because this is what the Darwinists try to do all the time. So to get back to India, when I left the temple of Ganesh in Mumbai, I went to the Nehru Science Center, which gives the scientific explanation. You have the two explanations in India, the Hindu explanation and the scientific explanation, and they're both irrational in their way. And the scientific explanation, the beginning is atoms formed. That's not a beginning. That doesn't make any sense. And so I'm saying that the world is not all that much different than India. You're given two explanations, and both of them are irrational, And people need some type of intermediary discipline to connect the two or come up with some type of rationality. And that's what I'm calling philosophy or logos.
Dr. Jones, in the 20th century, do you think the study of being has collapsed? To my mind, one of the few sort of quasi-Catholic thinkers to even try and approach it would be Heidegger. But majority of the 20th century was filled with people either trying to downplay the essentialism of being or to twist it into something very perverse, Sartre or Foucault.
Yes. It has collapsed. It has collapsed. And what you have is an attack on being. The big attack that took place when I was still connected with academia was called deconstruction. If you read somebody like Jacques Derrida, Jacques Derrida is a Jew, the son of rabbis in Africa. I think he was from Algeria, and his whole book, his whole life project, is an attack on being, on essence, on the idea that there is any essence to anything. There is no essence. Sartre had his own attack. He said existence precedes essence. That was his attack. Foucault succeeded Sartre as the preeminent French philosopher, and his attack was on being as well. This is what the modern philosophers have in common. They hate being. Foucault's grudge was based on his homosexuality because the homosexual is acting against nature. And so he hates the idea of nature by definition, because his acts are unnatural, and he only feels good if he can make everyone else believe that there is no such thing as nature or an order to the universe. Alfred Kinsey was in exactly the same situation. He was a homosexual. I was one of the first people to expose him as a homosexual. The cat is now out of the bag. And as a homosexual, he waged war against normative sexuality. The idea that there is a plan in your body placed there by God that will lead to the continuation of the human race was completely alien to a homosexual, because every time he acts as a homosexual, he defies that plan. So yes, you're right. There's an attack on being.
I'm curious, Dr. Jones. You write a lot about the problems of modernity. You place a lot of the root problems in rationalized sexual misbehavior. Do you believe that the ills of the modern world are largely the product of conscious actors working against moral reason? Or do you think that there is in any way larger process of cultural decline that preceded the subversive movements that we saw in the 18th century?
The whole point of my book, Libido Dominandi, Sexual Liberation and Political Control, is to point out who the actors were. Who the actors were in this particular area, namely the sexual revolution, and how they were conscious of what they were doing, and how they were their insights were used as part of a political agenda. So the Marquis de Sade begins with the Marquis de Sade, the Illuminati, the real Illuminati, the actual organization that existed in Bavaria under Adam Weishaupt, how those ideas got transmitted by Abbe Barruel in spite of himself, how Byron and Shelley read Barruel and picked up these ideas, how they were, the main idea being the one that Adam Weishaupt took from the Jesuits and the Jesuits' examination of conscience, which ended up by the end of the 19th century as Sigmund Freud's psychoanalysis, how that led to Wilhelm Reich, who was a student of Sigmund Freud, who then ended up on the front page of the New York Times Magazine in the 1970s as the architect of sexual liberation as political control. That's the whole point of that book.
Right. And so do you believe that they were exploiting a central weakness in human nature generally, or was there something that happened to Western civilization generally that allowed these people to worm their way in and to exploit and subvert?
Yeah, there's a flaw in human nature. They were exploiting it. The flaw is what St. Augustine would call original sin. Mm-hmm. The result of Adam's sin had been passed from generation to generation, and we all have this flaw. And Augustine, there are 7 deadly sins, but Augustine said the one that really grabs you and gets a hold of you is lust. And he says no one can escape it. Many people feel that he overemphasizes the power of lust, maybe because of his own biography. He lived with a concubine for 15 years and then just dumped her to marry an heiress, and then decided not to do that and became a celibate priest after that. So he had baggage of his own. But I think what is Sigmund Freud or the moderns certainly back up what Augustine said. Everybody has this weakness. And the whole point of the modern psychology is to engineer this weakness to use it as a form of control. That's the whole point. That is the whole point of modern psychology. Every form of psychology, modern psychology, Freudianism, Watsonian behaviorism, or third way, Carl Rogers stuff, are all forms of social engineering. In other words, take control over people.
One could also argue that the weakness to giving into lust has always been with mankind since the dawn of time. So my question is, why do you think this seemed to come to a head in the 1960s in America and in Europe as well?
Technology is a crucial point.
Maybe the pill. I mean, that's also when
technology. I'm talking, as I said in the talk. If you read Libido, Marquis de Sade proposed exposing women naked in the theater, and I've said in talks I've given, there's a technological problem here. Okay. Either you have a small theater in which you can get a really good look at the women, but that's only a few people you can mobilize, or you have a really big theater in which you got a lot of people, but you can't really get a good look at the women. And that was a technological problem that was solved first by the motion picture. The motion picture, the rise of the motion picture in America corresponded in time to Jewish migration to America. And the Jews took over the film industry and located in Hollywood, and they immediately started to undermine the sexual morals of the nation, which led to the Hays Code first, and then to the Legion of Decency, which was basically the Catholic attempt to keep the Jews' penchant for pornography and sexual subversion under control. That got broken in 1965 with the movie The Pawnbroker, and the Catholic Church has never regained the upper hand. The Jews have had the upper hand ever since then, to the point now where pornography is everywhere. Can't get away from it.
Well, that reminds me of another friend of ours from the Social Matter Network, Ryan Landry, who used to have a show called Weimerica, obviously based on the sort of Weimar period in Germany's history. And his basic thesis was America has a very similar parallel to that era in the 1920s and 30s in Germany. And do you see some parallels to that period in Germany to America today? And if so, where do you think we're going, and how do we sort of get out of this mess, if you have any suggestions?
The main similarity is Jewish control of the culture. After World War I, the Jews took control of German culture, and they were so much more egregious in their violation of social norms in Germany than they were in America, and it led to a much more violent reaction in Germany, namely the rise of Adolf Hitler, which could not have taken place without either Bolshevism in the Soviet Union or decadence in the Weimar Republic, and both of them were run by Jews. Both of them were Jewish. What you saw in America is pretty much the same thing. The Jews in the 1920s were thwarted by the Catholics, but they came back with a vengeance in 1965, and we haven't, the forces of decency have yet to regain control. So the question is, what can we do? I think we have to talk about it, first of all. And so an article just appeared in a periodical called Russian Insider, and it said, It's time to end the Jew taboo, by which he means no one's allowed to criticize the Jews Well, this is a disastrous situation. We have this now double standard where Amy Dean can write an article in Tikkun magazine and say the Jews are responsible for gay marriage and brag about it and think they all deserve the Nobel Prize for doing this. And I say it, and I'm called an anti-Semite. Well, we have to break this taboo. The first thing we have to do is we have to be able to talk openly and honestly about the pernicious influence that this group of people has had on our culture.
Dr. Jones, do you see any signs of maybe subcultures within the U.S. becoming inoculated to some extent against the issues, the tactics, let's say, that you describe in Libido Dominandi, your book on the sexual revolution? I'm thinking specifically of traditional Catholics. Those churches seem to be packed. There's Orthodox is growing in America, and the Mormons are producing things like edited TV shows and movies, removing some of the gratuitous sex and violence. So I see some hope that people are developing countermeasures. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes. The first step in any reform is consciousness. You can't act unless you understand the situation. And if you understand the situation, then you can sort of figure out what to do. So the first step is saying something very simple. Sexual liberation is a form of political control. No one ever said that before I wrote that book. I mean, it was implicit in a lot of different writings, but no one ever said it before. And I'm saying that the Achilles heel of social engineering, and this is a form of social engineering, is that if you understand what's going on, it doesn't work. Now, that's easy to see with sex. Trouble is, you've got this weakness. And even if you can see it, you may become addicted to pornography because it's very addictive, okay? But at least you know now what you're getting into. It's not freedom. Okay?
No, I've made your a very abridged version of your points in Libido Dominandi to pretty normal people before that case, and they're very troubled by it because it's so reasonable, and you're really not saying anything that's like beyond, you're not saying something that can't be said in public. Let's say like the Jewish issue would be difficult to bring up with a lot of people. But it's a compelling case, and I think it's just about impossible to argue against.
Well, I think the best example Dr. Jones gave once was when the Israelis and Palestinians were having one of their skirmishes, and I think the Israelis were able to grab control of the airwaves over the Gaza Strip or somewhere like that, and they broadcast pornography. And I'll let Dr. Jones explain what he meant by that.
Yeah, well, if pornography is freedom, does that mean the Israelis want to bring freedom to the Palestinian people? No, that's preposterous. This proves what the Israelis did in Ramallah, proves that pornography is a weapon. And it's always, that's what it's been. That's the way the Marquis de Sade saw it at the time of the French Revolution. That's what it's been ever since. The Palais Royal published pornography as a way of bringing down the Bourbon monarchy. Nothing has changed in this regard. It's a form of control. It's a form of subversion. And so, in addition to what I said about Ramallah, we have Germany. When I was there, I was teaching in Germany in the mid-'70s. There was large sympathy among people of my generation with the Baader-Meinhof gang, who were basically Marxist terrorists, who almost overthrew the government. The government allowed the country to be flooded with pornography at that time to divert people of my generation, young people, away from the political and into the sexual. It happened in Portugal at the same time. Frank Carlucci flooded Portugal with pornography. Frank Carlucci was working for the CIA at the time. It happened in Panama, with the Bush invasion of Panama. They talked about playing rock music. They never talked about the fact that there was pornography being broadcast. Pornography is a weapon. And the fact that it is allowed means that there's a certain group, and in the United States, it's the Jews, who are waging war on everything else by destroying their morals. There's no question that the Jews are behind pornography. No question. I wrote the article. It's in the Jewish Revolutionary Spirit. Jewish professor, Professor Abrams in England, writes the same thing in the Jewish Quarterly in England. And he says, so why are we ashamed? We should be proud of this. There's no difference. Everyone admits this. Okay? But if I say it, I'm called an anti-Semite. If you say it, you're called an anti-Semite. And that's the problem. We have to break this taboo here.
Do you see, Dr. Jones, in the context of the culture war, the possibility of blowback against from what the Jewish culture distorters are putting out, coming back to make them weaker in the process?
Oh yeah, it's. I think it's. I have one friend, a Jewish friend, who is constantly telling me that Hitler's going to look like a walk in the park compared to what's coming down the pike. There's going to be a reaction. This is what he's saying, and this man put up money, his own money, to have the Civiltà Cattolica series on the Jewish question translated into English, because he thought this is the only way to deal with this issue. This is the rational way to deal with this issue. By saying, first of all, you have to say there is an issue. There is a Jewish question. Okay, you can't just blow it off the way Jordan Peterson does, you know, as some type of.
I'm so glad you brought him up. I'm so glad.
Cranky, anti-Semite, envious people because Jews are so smart and we're so stupid. That's not the way. That's not Civiltà Cattolica. The Civiltà Cattolica series that's the official magazine of the Vatican. And by 1890, which is when the series came out, no one in Europe could deny that there was a problem and that the problem was called the Jewish question. No one could deny it. We have to deal with it rationally. And as I said, in the Jewish revolutionary spirit, the church does have a tradition. No other institution has lasted as long as the church, and they dealt with the Jewish question for 1,500 years in a rational way. The solution was called Sicut Judaeus Non, which basically says no one has the right to harm a Jew or disturb his religious services or dig up corpses to get money in Jewish cemeteries. But on the other hand, the Jew has no right to subvert your culture, subvert your morals, or engage in blasphemy. That was a good modus vivendi.
Well, what do you think about the Orthodox versus secular Jewish split? I have some friends, mostly likely of the secular bent, who have told me on various occasions that there's sort of a war between those two groups. They literally, and I quote, they hate each other. And I would sort of see that the secular Jewish culture is very destructive not only to non-Jews, but also the Orthodox Jewish culture as well. And so I can see how there's a lot of antagonism there, and the Jews are also being threatened by this sort of sexual revolution stuff. Do you see any reconciliation there, or maybe an alliance with the Orthodoxy? I don't really know what your opinion of them is, but I'd like to hear what you think.
No, there are some exceptions. There's some Orthodox rabbis that will go along with Catholics on abortion. But in general, no. The answer is no. And why do I say no? Why is it impossible? Because the book that the Orthodox Jews study is the Talmud. And the Talmud is anti-logos. The Talmud was created to keep Jews from converting to Christianity. Judaism is a religion that's younger than Christianity. It came into being, the Talmud was codified basically 600 years, the Babylonian Talmud, 600 years after Christ. Heinrich Graetz is the father of Jewish historiography, and he said the morals of Polish Jews were corrupted by reading the Talmud because all it does is teach you how to cheat and lie and steal. Now, if I said it, I'd be called an anti-Semite, but Heinrich Graetz is the father of Jewish historiography. He said it, okay? And that's why I'm very skeptical about any type of collaboration with the Orthodox.
Would you agree, Dr. Jones, that Talmudic Judaism and Orthodox Judaism is actually more hostile to Christianity than Islam?
I think yes, sir. There's no question. Absolutely no question.
I mean, it exists to be an anti-Christianity. That's what it is.
Look, it's the difference between a Muslim and a Jew is that the Jews are the people that killed Christ, their Messiah, and they are enemies of the entire human race. The Muslim doesn't understand. He worships the same God, and he doesn't understand what he worships. You worship what you do not understand, is what Jesus said to the Samaritan woman. And this is what the Muslims are. They do not understand. That's not the same thing as this implacable hatred that you find at the heart of Judaism.
While we're on the subject of Christ killing, I'm sure you've seen The Passion of the Christ.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on Mel Gibson?
A man who has trouble controlling his passions.
Yeah, he's actually made somewhat of a resurgence on the internet, at least as of late. But very, very colorful character. A force for good overall, perhaps.
Look, I've never spoken with Mel Gibson, but I have spoken with his father, and we tried to collaborate, and I just found I could not talk to his father. I mean, this is a man who's made up his mind on everything. He basically left the Catholic Church. He's part of this schismatic splinter group, and I think Mel was damaged by his father's decision. Mel has his own kind of schismatic operation out there on the West Coast. I wish I could have talked to Mel. I still wish. I would love to sit down and talk to Mel Gibson. So if he's listening, give me a call, Mel. I mean, we have a lot in common, and there are lots of things I'd like to talk to you about, but I think you've been damaged by this combination of a schismatic church and passions that we all have trouble controlling.
Well, he went on Joe Rogan not too long ago, and it was sort of a strange interview because he brought his doctor with him, and it was sort of this strange infomercial that his doctor was doing the whole time, and everybody kind of wanted to ask Mel these like more interesting questions about Mel, but that's not why he was there. So I'm wondering if he's very reluctant to talk to people about sort of himself and his past, but I hope he gets a chance.
I think he is. Look, well, what is he? He's an actor. An actor is a vacuum waiting to be filled. Pirandello wrote a play called 7 Actors in Search of a Play. He's like an actor in search of a play.
That's the Sicilian play, right?
Yeah. And so I think that that's where he needs to collaborate. I'd love to collaborate with Mel. I have a great idea for a film that he could make as an absolutely dynamite film. I'm trying to get in contact with him for years on this idea.
What's the?
I am reluctant to talk about this film because I don't want to queer the deal. But it would be the logical. Let me just say this: it would be the logical sequel to The Passion of the Christ. And I'm not talking about the resurrection. I'm talking about something that happened centuries down the road. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is when you cut yourself off from the Catholic Church and you put yourself into one of these tiny schismatic sects, you're cutting yourself off from people who could help you. And you're surrounding yourself with people who are just naturally going to be lackeys and have the same problem you have. That's Mel Gibson's theological problem. And it doesn't help you solve your moral problems when you have that theological problem.
Dr. Jones, do you think that there will ever be any room for what's left, the WASP elite in America, to cooperate with what's left of the last good standing Catholic elites in America? Or do you think that after several decades of sort of cultural war between the two factions that there's no room for collaboration at this point?
There's always room for collaboration, but the WASP elite went out of existence. They took their own birth control propaganda too seriously, and they all went out of existence because they didn't have children. This was in a letter that when I was doing research under Kinsey. Basically, the head of the Rockefeller Institute said, I don't agree with Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood says you should have fewer children. And our people are lining up at the door of Planned Parenthood and having fewer children. We should have more children. Other people should have fewer children, like the Catholics and the Negroes. But we should have a lot of children. Junior Rockefeller had 5 children. 6. He had 6 children. But anyway, that's the model, and they went out of existence. So I once gave a talk on Harvard about the first qualification you need to get into Harvard is existence. If you don't have existence, you can't go to Harvard. And that's why my son went to Harvard, because he existed. And the WASP elite, the children, their children didn't exist. So that's over. But we can still collaborate. Everything changes over generations. There's always going to be a Catholic Church. There's always going to be someone in charge. The question is the Catholic Church going to stand up and defend its real principles? Or is it going to offer up incense to idols, to Caesar? This is the perennial temptation of the Catholic Church, to cut and dilute doctrine so that we are more pleasing to Caesar. It's a recipe for disaster.
Well, on that subject, do you think that the Catholic Church should resume its role as sort of an arbiter of labor guilds? In the modern era, you have the complete collapse of the unions, and you have a disinterest by the state towards its citizens on labor issues. Do you think that the Catholic Church should try and fill in that void as they once did for the majority of European history?
Yes, I remember as a child my friend's father going to classes on Quadragesimo Anno that were given at the Jesuit preparatory school in Philadelphia. That era is gone.
Yeah.
That's over. That's over.
The church.
Okay. Now, what happened? Well, the church. The short answer to that question is neoconservatism. Michael Novak, Richard John Newhouse, and George Weigel, and the worst culprit of all, Robert Sirica of the Acton Institute. These are all paid prostitutes. I hope I don't offend any prostitutes out there by linking these. Okay, but they're all, Sirica is the worst, a paid prostitute of the oligarchs whose job is to subvert Catholic teaching on economics. Okay, he's a homosexual. He spent the first half of his life as a gay activist on the West Coast, and now he's gone from sodomy to usury. So he spent his entire life promoting sins that cry to heaven for vengeance, and the church does nothing. Nothing. As a matter of fact, he will have, he had a symposium in Argentina, and the bishops of Argentina went to his symposium because he wines them and he dines them. The same thing is true of his activity in Rome, where the people in Rome who know what's going on say that the people of the Acton Institute stand out in front of places like Santa Croce like prostitutes, like the prostitutes that they are, and they accost seminarians as they're going in to the building to get them to go to their seminars. Why can't the church do something about this? If they don't do anything about this, they will destroy their own teaching. They will make any attempt to reward labor in an honest way will make it impossible, because what Robert Sirica is doing is waging war on labor. His job is to drive wages down because that's in the interest of the oligarchs who pay his bills.
Well, speaking of neoconservatism, you had an article on your one of your previous trips to Iran, culture jihad in Iran.
Yes.
I'm curious. Do you think that the neoconservative propaganda that's being shoveled into the mouths of the American people is something that could be overcome in a way where people can see that the Jewish culture distorters and sodomites here at home are a far bigger threat than say Shia Muslims in Iran?
I think neoconservatism is over. We're running a review in this month's issue of Culture Wars about Michael Novak's last book, his autobiography. And basically, there are two explanations of why neoconservatism is over, dead, and will not come back. Explanation number one is Pope Francis, and explanation number two is Donald Trump. Between the two of them, they have obliterated neoconservatism. If you don't believe me, go back to the spring of 2016 and read National Review. And read all of these people saying that if you elect Trump, it will be the end of the world. We are the spokesman for conservatism. Trump is not a true conservative. Robbie George of Princeton said exactly that in Rational Review, and the world passed him by. The dogs bark, the neoconservative dogs bark, and the Trump caravan passes by. So they've been bypassed by the movement of history. It's over.
So are you warming up on Trump then? Is that fair to say? No.
Trump is the classic example of what Hegel would call die List der Vernunft, the cunning of reason. He is a completely passion-driven man. Mm-hmm. He makes Martin Luther look cold and calculating by comparison. He is a man who tweets. He is a man who wears his heart on his sleeve. His passions rule this man's life, but that doesn't mean that God can't use him to basically bring about his end. And I think the main achievement of Donald Trump is going to be the dissolution of the American empire. Whether he thinks what he's doing, that's what he's doing or not. And we're facing it right now. Okay, this week, President Macron showed up and warned Trump, don't pull out of the Iran nuclear deal. And Trump goes on and says, I convinced Macron. I'm such a great convincer. And now yesterday, Angela Merkel showed up and she said exactly the same thing. Do not pull out of the Iran nuclear deal. And she will have the final word, because she apparently said this to Benjamin Netanyahu when he showed up in Germany. She said, look, if the United States pulls out of the nuclear deal, you will have Germany, France, England, China, and Russia on one side, and the United States and Israel on the other. Is that what you want? That is what's going to happen. I think that's God's plan. And Trump will fulfill this plan in spite of himself.
Well, it certainly seems to me that he's doing, at least in the early stages of winding down this empire. I mean, the strike that they did on Syria was such a joke. I mean, it was obvious, I think, that he has certain neocon Jewish backers, and they demand certain actions from him or words from him.
He was throwing them red meat.
Yeah, so he blew up a couple of empty.
I think it's the opposite. I think he's going after the Jews. He basically, the deep state is trying to destroy Trump. They've been trying to destroy Trump ever since the minute he got elected.
Certainly.
And I think Trump feels that the only group of people powerful enough to protect him are the Jews. And so he's got to have the Jews on his side. So he gets people like John Bolton, the biggest warmonger in North America, is now this security advisor. And Nikki Haley, another incredible warmonger. And he thinks by doing this and by doing things like moving the embassy to Jerusalem, the Jews will love him and they will protect him from the deep state. Well, that's a big assumption on his part.
I have a question related to the empire and the oligarchs. I've often wondered throughout my life, why is it so hard for people just to leave each other alone and live the way they want to live? And it's never really possible. And you could look at America as sort of the last bastion of freedom, quote unquote, but it's really not true. And I wanted to sort of maybe have you comment on your work in Slaughter of Cities a little bit about how your experience growing up is in some ways, I think, similar to some of our generations, in that our communities are being sort of radically transformed by forces that we can't really see and we don't elect. And I've noticed this in my life growing up, seeing the people who live in my community change dramatically. They're from other countries. They don't speak the same language. And I just want to go back to an earlier time when I can be around people that I basically just don't have disagreements with as much. It's very simple instinct I have. And my struggle seems to be with these social engineers and these oligarchs who basically make money off of having more and more people come in, shop at more, super centers and drive wages down. And so how do the little people in this empire that seems to be ruled by the rich and the oligarchs make their way in life and form their own communities without getting disrupted by these very powerful people from outside the community?
That's a good question. I've had intimate experience of this in Cincinnati. When I was writing Slaughter of Cities, there was a Latin mass group that would invite me down. They would gather together at Old St. Mary's. It was the only Latin mass in the entire Cincinnati area, so people would drive from a 50-mile radius to come there. And I said, that's fine, that's a good idea, but it's not a community. It's a society. It's a Gesellschaft and not a Gemeinschaft. Okay, and I said, if you want a community, you have to move into the neighborhood. Now, at this point, that was over the Rhine. And at this point, which was the early 90s, I think it was possible. It was doable because this was the beginning of gentrification. So you would have been neck and neck. The Catholics would have been neck and neck with the homosexuals, who were the preferred avant-garde of gentrification in places like this. The Catholics, however, were full of fear. Their mind had been colonized by liberalism and individualism, and they all felt safe in the suburbs off by themselves, and so they didn't act on what I said. And then on top of that, there was a riot, which I think was in reaction to the homosexual gentrification, and that convinced them that they had made the right decision. So an opportunity was lost. So my son, youngest son, ended up dancing for the Cincinnati Ballet. He shows up in Over the Rhine 25 years later, and they're all gone. So I'm saying that was doable. What was doable? I think that you have to have, first of all, you have to have an ethnic identity, and you have to have a geographical area. The triple melting pot specifies that ethnic identity in America is based on religion. So it's Protestant, Catholic, and Jew, no matter where you come from. And so I'm biracial personally. I'm Irish and German, which means both sides of this Catholic community, they mixed together and they became an American identity. That's the ethnic identity, and the place is the parish. There are still parishes, and parishes are still geographic. So you can do this. This can be done, I think, in spite of the social engineers. Not to say social engineering has changed or that they're going to let up, but I think it is doable if you're conscious of what you're doing.
What do you think of the Mormon community? I was just checking, birth rates, for example, and Catholics are pretty high up there for America, at least. And Mormons, however, they still beat them. Now, that's not obviously the only thing you should measure a society on or a community. But they seem to have that geographic and cultural and religious community that I think the Catholic Church used to have, and it's probably lost. It's partly because the Catholic Church is so much bigger and it's broader in scope. But that has always been an interesting model to me, because they were essentially outcasts in their own country at one point, and they formed their own society within a larger nation. And they've thrived in so many ways. And I'm not Mormon, but I've always admired them for their success. And I think it's an interesting model for people who are very alienated from the society they grew up in. And maybe they need to get together and create a parish or something. But it seems to be a model that works. And I'd love to hear what you think.
I'm not recommending that you become a Mormon.
That's fine. I don't plan on that particular religion. But
that's what you were asking.
No, What can we learn? What can we learn? That's good.
What we're talking about here are Judaizing sects, like the Seventh-day Adventist, people who admire Jews. And why do they admire Jews? Well, because they're so successful in dealing with the world. And that includes, among the Orthodox in places like Brooklyn and New Jersey, creating these bulletproof ethnic communities. Okay? You're right. They do. The Jews are allowed to do it because they have enormous political power in places like that. Catholics cannot do it because they don't have that political power. And that political power was broken in the post-World War II period by the destruction of all those Catholic neighborhoods that I talk about in Slaughter of Cities. Okay, so we're our goal in life as Catholics is not to build the perfect bulletproof ethnic community. Our goal, St. Augustine settled this a long time ago when he wrote The City of God. City of God is basically the Christian response to Plato's Republic. And what he's saying is that, okay, we're giving up on the dream of the philosophers and the perfect community. We can't have a perfect community here on earth. The only perfect community is the city of God, and we'll only recognize that in heaven. So that, in many ways, is both the strength and the weakness of the Catholic position. It is important, but it's not the ultimate important thing. And between those two things, you can get people who emphasize too much the otherworldly aspect of life, and they wreck or allow the worldly aspect to be wrecked. I deal with this in Cardinal Kroll. I did a biography of Cardinal Kroll, and I think he was completely oblivious to the war that was being waged against him and the church in Philadelphia, and he should have defended it, even if it is not, even if we do have no abiding place here, and that our true happiness is only in the city of God, in heaven.
I'd like to ask you a question about appealing to the younger people. I'm sure this is something that a lot of the priests and church leaders always try to work on, because you have to get those pews filled up and hopefully with families. And this is something that I've thought about a lot, in particular in making the case for church or some sort of religious gathering for women. I don't know if you could speak to that at all, but I have personal experience with women who used to be Catholic, or at least they were raised Catholic, and they drifted away from it because they felt like it was an oppressive system where they were designated as basically just, baby makers, and they weren't given these bigger opportunities, in big air quotes, that our secular society offers them. And that seems to particularly appeal to the more intelligent women, it seems. I could be wrong about that, but at least the ones that want to go into the university system, and they feel like the Catholic system is at odds with that. And the Mormons deal with this too. I mean, a lot of the women who go to university, they really don't study anything that would actually help them in their career. That's more like they just use it to meet their husband. But in the Catholic world, I don't know how they reconcile that, and I don't know if you can speak to how do you reach out to women. And also, I'd love to hear what you think about Phyllis Schlafly, who just recently passed away. I believe she was Catholic, but she tried to kind of figure this out as well. But I think it's a big issue that we all need to try to work on.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to interview Phyllis Schlafly about a couple months before she died at her home in St. Louis. Phyllis Schlafly was the abused wife of the Republican Party. The Republican Party would stagger home drunk every 4 years at midnight and beat up Phyllis, and then wake up in the morning with a hangover and say they were sorry, and Phyllis would always welcome the Republican Party back. She understood the crooked game that was the Republican Party, and crooked deals like Bob Dole, for example, who was given the nomination not to win the presidency because everybody knew he couldn't win it, but to purge the followers of Pat Buchanan from the Republican Party. Crooked operation. And she was taken in by it because she was a conservative. She defined herself as a conservative because she had to, because she had no choice in the matter, because America First had been destroyed by the time she reached her political majority. Charles Lindbergh gave his famous speech in St. Louis when Phyllis was a senior in high school. That's the political direction she should have taken, but she could not take it because of historical circumstances. Okay? She was a genius when it came to mobilizing state legislatures. She could send terror. She could spread terror throughout every legislature in the United States of America. And that's precisely what she did during the 70s when she defeated the Equal Rights Amendment. So,
do you think she would be a role model for women? It may be a high standard. But
Phyllis Schlafly earned money during World War II by testing machine guns. I always thought that was the best expression of her personality. She could machine gun anybody. I mean, she could just mow down an entire audience of feminists, whatever it was. She could just mow them down.
Yeah. I have her book.
She was a machine gunner. Okay, but she was so unique. No, she's not a role model. She was completely unique.
Yeah.
It's like saying, Usain Bolt should be a role model for people. Well, no, there's one guy who's that fast, and that's it. No, she took the cause of women who could not articulate these things herself, and she was successful in a political campaign that was ultimately irrelevant. Okay, because in the middle of the interview, her heir apparent, Martin, interrupts our conversation and says, the Supreme Court or the Pentagon just struck down all restrictions on women in combat. So I turned to Phyllis and I said, this is the epitome of everything you campaigned against. You know, you used to say if you pass the ERA, women will be in combat. And now we defeated the ERA and women are in combat anyway, because what you're seeing here is this so-called representative government isn't worth a pitcher of warm spit, as someone once said. In other words, she was outflanked by a movement that she didn't understand by the end of her life. She didn't know what a neoconservative was. She was just adrift. As a result, a lot of women got sucked into something called feminism. And they didn't even know it. They didn't even know what was happening. I'm dealing with this in Iran right now, which is full of, every woman is a feminist in Iran. And there's this conflict now because, I forgot to have a family. I'm 35 years old. Gee, I forgot to have a family.
Well,
what do I do?
That's what's terrifying about it, is that they may come around to some of their misdeeds, but it's too late. You can't have a family when you're 40 years old or 50 years old. I mean, it just becomes exponentially harder, just biologically.
That's right. And so I don't need to convince anyone of that. Everybody knows that. And all I'm trying to say is, honey, if you bought into feminism and you didn't have a family, you're in trouble. And that's what I'm trying to say to the Iranians right now, because they're even less conscious of what feminism is than Catholics are in this country, much less conscious. Phyllis was an anti-feminist. There's no such thing as an anti-feminist in Iran. They don't understand it. Even Phyllis's understanding, which was not perfect, was miles ahead of what the Iranians have. So all you have to do is say, look, I've told this story before, but I'm sitting in Greenwich Village, Washington Square, on a park bench, and there's a woman who says, I was last talking to another woman. I was eating my cheese sandwich at midnight, as usual, and I burst into tears because my life is over. I have no friends. I have no family. I have no children. I dedicated my entire life to a law firm, and now I have nothing. Well, keep that in mind, ladies, because that's what the oligarchs have in mind for you. They will extract every erg of labor from your body and then throw you away like a Dixie cup when it's over. And if you don't wake up soon, that'll be your fate.
So, Dr. Jones, you mentioned that you think that neoconservatism is basically dead in the water, and that the great Satan, the American empire, is withdrawing. But do you think that the cultural techniques of political control and cultural exports, or anti-cultural exports rather, such as pornography, are going to outlive the actual physical military empire?
No. I think if the empire weren't there as an enforcer, local groups could take control of their culture and ban things like that. We're even seeing that with abortion, for example. Mm-hmm. If we didn't have the Supreme Court, abortion would be illegal in every place but New York and California.
Right.
But that's why we have the Supreme Court. So the empire is the enforcer, and it gives a sense of legitimacy, the aura of legitimacy, to things that everybody knows are wrong.
Well, pornography and even Hollywood movies are censored to a great degree in many countries. I'm thinking like Lebanon, Russia. other countries in Eastern Europe, they'll have advertisements on the streets for Hollywood movies, but the advertisement will be much less risque or offensive than it would have been in America. So the rest of the world's already, in some ways, have their guard up to some extent.
Yes. Yeah, certainly in Iran, places like China, yes. They are aware that this is inimical to a good social order, and they've taken measures to protect themselves.
Dr. Jones, do you think that the sort of ongoing vagrant homelessness crisis on the West Coast of the United States is part of a larger slaughter of cities narrative? There's almost 200,000 homeless people now on the West Coast. And there's one area of California in particular, Orange County, which is filled, or used to be filled with like John Bircher wasps, even into the 90s. They've been slowly displaced and kicked out of Orange County because of a large homeless population that's been requisitioned there by the state. The state of California put all these homeless people there, freaked out all the people in Orange County, people who've lived there for 100 years, and they've left. And the county's on the verge of going blue when it's been red for I think my entire lifetime, most of the lifetime in California. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds plausible. I mean, but I wasn't aware of that. This is the first time I've heard about this whole mobilization of homeless people. But I think the better example is the huge immigration of Middle Easterners to Europe. Has all of these the Cuban boat lift, all of these mass migrations can be mobilized politically.
Right.
And they can disrupt the society, and when the society gets disrupted, people will move. This is what happened when black people were basically shunted into Catholic ethnic neighborhoods in cities like Chicago. The situation became intolerable. The government was not enforcing the laws. They were allowed to engage in criminal activity, random violence, and the ethnic population left, welcomed with open arms into the suburbs.
Do you think that traditional Catholics should try and fit into the Republican Party? Should they try and take over wings of it, or do you think that has already been tried and failed with Buchanan?
I think you're saying something that's just too global. I think if you're a Catholic in an area where you have a following and you see a political opportunity, I think you should seize on it. I think there are certain people who should seize on it, and I see this situation emerging in South Bend, Indiana, right now as we speak. We have a gay mayor who has announced that he's running for president of the United States. It's a natural trajectory, South Bend to the White House, we'll jump over St. Joseph County, all this other type, go right to he's got David Axelrod working on his campaign. So Obama had to become at least a senator, but now the things have changed because he's been anointed as the first gay mayor. The first gay president of the United States by Frank Bruni of the New York Times. And if it appears in the New York Times, it's got to be true. So anyway, he believes it anyway, and he's going on that. This is creating a vacuum. There's a moment of opportunity right now for local candidates here because the mayor has just made a horrendous political blunder here. He overruled the city council, which had voted to allow a zoning change for a pro-life counseling center. That was a mistake, and he's going to suffer from that mistake. So I'm saying there's an opportunity. I think that there are people, Catholics, who understand the situation. They should try to ameliorate the situation, and we'll see what happens. Maybe it will happen here. So I think the Republican Party is too big. That's an alien entity. We need to start be more specific.
Dr. Jones, I have a somewhat personal question, not too personal, but I'm curious, like, what is your relationship with your local parish, as we were talking about, being local and in your community? Do people know who you are? I'm sure they do, but it's like, do you just sit in the pew like everybody else and listen to the priest, or how do you carry about, discussing things with people? Because, you have obviously a certain ability to speak, so I'm very curious how that works.
I'm glad you brought this up, because this I am now going to announce that I am a prophet. The proof that I am a prophet is that I have no honor in my native place. So my ideas are out there. I agree with that. But I have a local group of people. I am a member of good standing of the local parish here, a geographical parish. I attend Mass at the Basilica at Notre Dame because the music is so beautiful. I go to daily Mass at a parish, local parish. But I have a network of people where we can talk honestly with each other. And given this fallen world, that's better than I can expect.